Don't skip this video. Have you ever wondered why silence can sometimes be more powerful than words? Marcus Aurelius once said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." In many relationships, we're confronted with toxic dynamics that leave us feeling drained, disrespected, or misunderstood. But what if I told you that silence could be the most profound form of self-respect you could offer yourself and others? In this video, we'll explore the Stoic philosophy behind using silence not as avoidance, but as a tool for emotional boundaries and personal growth. Whether you're dealing with toxic relationships or seeking clarity in your personal connections, silence can help you reclaim your peace, avoid unnecessary conflict, and gain emotional control. I'll show you practical examples of how silent communication can build stronger, healthier boundaries, empowering you to walk away from toxicity without saying a word. Stay with me to discover how silence can protect your emotions, nurture your self-worth, and foster meaningful relationships. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Stoic Narratives Official for more insightful content. No.1 Silence as a self-protection tool. In life, we often find ourselves entangled in relationships that drain us, whether they are romantic, friendships, or even family connections. These relationships may begin with good intentions, but over time, they can evolve into something toxic. Toxicity, in this sense, refers to a pattern of behaviors that undermine your self-worth, manipulate your emotions, or even violate your emotional boundaries. But how do we escape this cycle without creating more damage? This is where silence becomes not just a refuge, but a powerful form of self-protection. It might seem counterintuitive at first, but in the context of Stoic philosophy, silence is far from passive. It is an active choice, one that preserves your peace and strengthens your emotional boundaries. Marcus Aurelius, one of the greatest Stoic philosophers, advised, "The more we value things outside our control, the less control we have." When you choose silence in the face of a toxic relationship, you're taking control of your emotions, your energy, and ultimately, your life. Silence, in this case, is not about avoiding confrontation. It's about reclaiming your space and your peace. Think about a time when you were involved in a conflict or argument that seemed endless. The more you spoke, the worse things became. You tried to explain yourself, but the more you said, the more you were misunderstood or dismissed. In such situations, silent treatment isn't an act of retaliation. It's a way to protect your emotional well-being and assert your emotional boundaries without further engaging in toxic patterns. When you remain silent, you create a boundary that the other person cannot easily cross. Your silence speaks volumes without the need for words. It is a sign that you will not tolerate behavior that undermines your dignity. Silence is not weakness. It's a sign of strength and self-respect. Now you may wonder, how does silence actually help me stay in control of my emotions? Here's the answer. Silence allows you to pause before reacting. Stoics teach us to observe our emotions without immediately being swept up by them. They remind us that we are not our emotions. They are simply signals we can choose to acknowledge or let go. In a heated moment, when your emotions are high, stepping back and choosing silence gives you the time to reflect and avoid reacting impulsively. This breaks the cycle of negativity and gives you the space to think clearly about the next steps. For example, imagine you're in a relationship where you've repeatedly communicated your boundaries, but they continue to be ignored. Every time you voice your needs, they're met with resistance, defensiveness, or manipulation. Instead of continuing the same conversation, which only escalates the tension, you choose silence. In this silence, you reflect on whether the relationship is truly serving you and whether the person you're involved with respects your emotional boundaries. Through silence, you reclaim your power. The more you practice this, the clearer your boundaries become. You no longer feel the need to engage in fruitless discussions that lead nowhere. Respect boundaries are not about saying no all the time, but knowing when to say nothing at all. By taking a step back and using silence as a self-protective measure, you are practicing self-worth. When you refuse to engage in toxic behaviors, you are valuing yourself enough to not let others pull you into their drama. Silence is your way of protecting that inner peace. No.2 Silence helps identify toxicity. In any relationship, there comes a point when we need to step back and reflect. Whether it's a friendship, a romantic connection, or a family relationship, we sometimes fail to recognize the toxicity creeping in. Toxicity in relationships doesn't always announce itself with grand gestures or loud conflicts. Often it hides in small, subtle ways, through emotional manipulation, dishonesty, and the consistent violation of emotional boundaries. But there's a powerful tool we can use to recognize these signs: silence. Stoic philosophy teaches us that one of the most important steps toward wisdom is the ability to step back from any situation and observe without judgment. Epictetus said, "Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants." The Stoics understood that our external world often distracts us from our internal peace, and so, we must learn to detach, observe, and reflect in order to truly understand our circumstances. In relationships, silence allows us to pause and evaluate. When emotions run high, our immediate reactions often lead us to ignore the subtle signs of toxicity. Yet, when we choose silence, we create space to process what's happening and gain clarity on whether we're dealing with healthy or harmful behavior. For instance, have you ever found yourself in a situation where you feel emotionally drained, but you can't quite pinpoint why? It's as if there's something in the dynamic that feels off, yet you can't see it clearly. This is where silence becomes crucial. By taking a step back and allowing yourself to disconnect emotionally, you can begin to notice the small but significant actions or words that signal toxicity. In toxic relationships, the manipulation often happens under the radar. A person might use passive-aggressive tactics, creating confusion and insecurity without openly confronting the issues. Instead of engaging in constant verbal battles or attempting to explain your feelings endlessly, silence allows you to recognize these patterns more clearly. Take the example of a person who always seems to turn the conversation back to themselves, never listening to your concerns. The lack of emotional support and empathy is a clear indicator that something is wrong. You may try to communicate your needs, but they are constantly dismissed or ignored. When you choose to remain silent in this instance, you are giving yourself space to understand whether the other person truly values you or whether they are simply focused on their own interests. Respecting your boundaries in these moments allows you to protect your self-worth and begin to discern what behaviors are toxic and unworthy of your time. Furthermore, silence helps you assess how your own emotional boundaries are being respected. If you constantly feel the need to defend yourself, explain your feelings, or justify your actions, you may be dealing with someone who doesn't value your emotional well-being. Silent communication in such instances serves as an assessment tool, allowing you to discern whether the relationship truly contributes to your growth or if it's draining your energy and peace. As you become more attuned to toxic behaviors, you will start recognizing the subtle red flags: the inconsistency, the gaslighting, and the deliberate disregard for your boundaries. These signs are often camouflaged by words or actions that seem benign at first. But with silence, you can clearly see through the facade. By embracing silence, you create a powerful emotional boundary that shields you from further harm. It's not about being passive or retreating in fear. Rather, it's a deliberate choice to regain control and protect your emotional peace. Stoic philosophers would argue that your emotions are under your control, and your response to any situation should be chosen wisely. Silence is your tool to regain that control. To truly recognize emotional manipulation and dishonesty, you need the clarity that comes with silence. By stepping back and observing without reacting, you open your mind to the truth of the situation. This allows you to make decisions not based on the noise of emotions, but on the grounded wisdom that silence provides. No.3 Silence and setting boundaries. In relationships, setting clear boundaries is essential for maintaining emotional health and mutual respect. However, many of us struggle with enforcing boundaries, often because we fear conflict or worry about how others will react. Stoicism teaches us that true strength lies in the ability to remain calm, measured, and unwavering in our values. One of the most powerful tools in boundary setting is silence. Silence is not about withdrawing or avoiding communication. It's a deliberate choice to uphold your values without engaging in emotional battles. When you choose silence in response to a boundary violation, you are not only protecting your own peace, but also demonstrating respect for yourself and others. It's a way of saying, I do not need to explain myself to anyone who does not respect my boundaries. Imagine you're in a conversation with someone who continuously interrupts you, disregarding your emotional boundaries. You've politely asked them to stop, but they persist. The temptation to raise your voice, defend yourself, or become frustrated is strong. But here's where silence becomes a Stoic tool. Rather than reacting, you choose to remain silent. You stop the conversation without saying a word, which sends a clear message. Your behavior is unacceptable, and I won't engage with it. This simple act of silence is a boundary in itself. You've communicated without using words, and the absence of your response speaks volumes. This is where Stoic philosophy comes in. The Stoics believed in the importance of controlling one's reactions. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." When someone disregards your emotional boundaries, you can't control their actions, but you can control how you respond. Silence allows you to take that control back. It's a choice not to engage in the toxic cycle of argument or defensiveness. It's a reminder to yourself that your boundaries are not negotiable, and you do not need to justify your limits to others. Enforcing boundaries through silence also helps to avoid unnecessary conflict. In many relationships, when we feel our boundaries being pushed, we react immediately, often escalating the situation. However, silence allows you to step back and gain perspective. It gives you time to reflect on the situation without being swept up in the emotional tide. It's important to remember that silence does not equate to passive acceptance. Instead, it's an empowered response that allows you to uphold your emotional boundaries while avoiding unnecessary confrontation. Let's consider another example. Imagine you've asked someone to respect your need for personal space or time alone. However, they continue to pressure you, making you feel guilty for wanting time to recharge. If you immediately give in to their demands, you're allowing them to cross your boundaries. But if you choose silence, simply not responding to their pressure, you are reaffirming that your needs are valid and deserve respect. Your silence becomes the space you need to assert your self-worth. This is an essential lesson in Stoic thought. By using silence to uphold your boundaries, you are not allowing external circumstances to dictate your emotional state. You are asserting control over how you engage with others, making it clear that your emotional well-being comes first. When you set clear boundaries, particularly in toxic or manipulative relationships, silence can be a protective shield. It forces the other person to confront their own behavior without giving them the chance to manipulate your responses. Remember, the practice of silence in setting boundaries is not about withdrawing or shutting down. It's about responding with dignity and respect for yourself. As the Stoic philosopher Seneca said, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. By remaining silent, you free yourself from the imagined fear of conflict or rejection and face the reality of standing firm in your values. No.4. Silence reduces conflict and tension. In every relationship, whether personal or professional, conflict and tension are inevitable. The challenge, however, lies in how we respond to them. In a world where instant reactions and heated exchanges seem to rule, the Stoic philosophy offers a powerful alternative: silence. Far from being passive, silence in the face of tension can be a profound tool for maintaining peace and clarity. When conflict arises, our immediate response is often to defend ourselves, to argue, or to explain our perspective. We feel the urge to react emotionally, believing that if we don't, we will be seen as weak or passive. Yet the Stoics teach us that true strength lies in control over our reactions. Seneca, a key Stoic philosopher, wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." This implies that the tension we feel in conflict is often amplified by our emotional reactions. By choosing silence, we can avoid escalating the situation and allow both parties the space needed for rational thought. Imagine a disagreement where emotions are running high. The other person may raise their voice, point fingers, or make accusations. Your first instinct may be to respond in kind, matching their volume or intensity. However, if you respond with silence, remaining calm and composed, you give both yourself and the situation time to settle. Your silence creates space where tension can dissipate naturally. At this moment, emotional boundaries are protected because you choose not to engage in the emotional chaos that often leads to deeper conflict. Silence in this context is not a refusal to communicate, but a way to communicate boundaries without words. It's about stepping back from the immediate urge to react and instead creating space for clarity. By not responding in a charged or defensive manner, you refuse to fuel the fire of anger or frustration. When emotions are high, words often cloud understanding. Silence, however, provides a pause, a chance for both parties to cool down and reflect. This practice is especially important in relationships where toxic behavior is present. Whether it's manipulation, disrespect, or emotional manipulation, the tendency is to engage in drama. However, engaging often strengthens the cycle of tension. By choosing silence, you take the power away from the manipulator. You refuse to give in to their emotional games. The absence of a reaction can be a powerful way to neutralize their behavior without confrontation. It allows the manipulative energy to lose its grip as it thrives on your emotional involvement. The Stoic approach to silence is rooted in the understanding that we cannot control other people's actions, but we can control how we react. By choosing silence, we align with the Stoic principle of accepting what is outside of our control and focusing only on our response. The philosopher Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." This mindset shifts the focus from external events to internal control, where silence becomes a tool of empowerment rather than avoidance. In relationships, silence helps reduce tension by halting the escalation of conflict. When two people are at odds, the desire to be heard often leads to louder voices and more intense exchanges. Silence disrupts this cycle. It makes the other person pause, perhaps even reflect on their words. This simple act can lower the intensity of the conflict and open the door for better understanding. Instead of adding fuel to the fire, you create a space for calm and rational dialogue. Silence also helps preserve self-worth. When we engage in heated arguments, we often end up compromising our own integrity. We may say things we don't mean or react in ways we later regret. By staying silent, you avoid such compromises. Your silence is a form of self-respect, an acknowledgement that your emotional stability is more important than winning the argument or being right. Number 5. Silence brings peace and healing. In a world full of noise where everyone is talking and trying to be heard, silence can feel like a rare commodity. But for the Stoics, silence is more than just the absence of sound. It's a profound practice that brings peace and healing. The quiet moments we choose to embrace are not just about retreating from the world, but about giving ourselves the space to heal, reflect, and reconnect with our true selves. The practice of silence allows us to step away from the chaos that often surrounds us. In relationships, especially those marked by tension or toxicity, silence offers a moment to breathe and regain our equilibrium. By embracing silence, we distance ourselves from the emotional turmoil that can cloud our judgment and lead to impulsive reactions. This time away from conflict, however brief, helps restore our emotional boundaries. It gives us the power to make decisions that align with our values, not our emotions. The Stoics teach us that peace begins within. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most influential Stoic philosophers, famously said, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." This is the essence of why silence brings healing. It creates space for introspection, allowing us to find solace within ourselves rather than seeking it externally. When we are in conflict or dealing with toxic relationships, the noise around us often distorts our perceptions. Silence, however, clears the clutter, giving us a chance to reflect and gain clarity. In relationships, whether with family, friends, or colleagues, emotional manipulation and toxic behavior can easily disrupt our peace. People may try to control or influence us, pulling us away from our core values. But the more we engage with these manipulations, the more our emotional energy is drained. In these moments, silence becomes a shield, protecting our peace and preserving our self-worth. By choosing not to react, we reclaim our power and stop feeding into unhealthy dynamics. Take, for example, a situation where someone close to you behaves in a way that feels manipulative or disrespectful. Your initial impulse might be to defend yourself, to argue, or to try to explain your feelings. However, responding in this way often escalates the tension. Silence, in contrast, acts as a calming force. It prevents you from getting caught up in the emotional turmoil and provides you the distance needed to see the situation clearly. By choosing silence, you give yourself the opportunity to consider the most constructive response, rather than reacting out of anger or frustration. This is where silence connects deeply with self-respect and self-worth. When we remain silent in moments of conflict, we are asserting that our peace is more valuable than winning an argument or proving a point. It's not about avoiding the problem. It's about choosing not to engage in a way that diminishes our sense of self. Silence becomes an act of love for ourselves, as it allows us to process our emotions and intentions before speaking. Moreover, silence brings healing by fostering mindfulness. It forces us to stop and listen, not just to the other person, but to ourselves. When we are constantly speaking, we often fail to hear the deeper truths that lie within. Silence opens the door to reflection and understanding. It helps us tune into our emotions, allowing us to identify what's truly bothering us and why. With this awareness, we can make more thoughtful decisions that contribute to emotional healing. The healing power of silence also extends to the relationships themselves. By practicing silence in moments of tension, we encourage a healthier dynamic. When both people in a relationship refrain from reacting impulsively and take the time to reflect, it creates an environment where communication can be clearer, more respectful, and more compassionate. Silence allows space for understanding and empathy, rather than fueling the fire of conflict. As we've explored today, silence isn't just a pause in communication. It's a powerful tool for self-awareness and emotional clarity. By practicing the Stoic art of detachment, you can begin to see toxic behaviors in your relationships clearly and protect your emotional boundaries. Silence helps you recognize emotional manipulation and dishonesty, allowing you to make better choices in your relationships and in life. So, I encourage you, don't just let this be another video you watch. Take action. Start practicing silence in your relationships and observe what it reveals. Notice how it can help you regain control and increase your self-worth by setting clear emotional boundaries. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What experiences have you had with toxic relationships, and how has silence helped you gain clarity? Share your story in the comments below. I'm eager to hear from you. If you found this video helpful, like and subscribe to Stoic Narratives Official for more wisdom. The next video will be even more insightful, so stay tuned.